Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Transatlantic Power Radio Show. I'm your host Andy Mercer, and usually I'm joined by my co-host Ronald Murphy. Unfortunately, Ron's a bit indisposed at the moment. Those of you who know him well know that he's very much a cryptozoologist man, and at the moment this is very much this season for the conferences in America, and Ron's unfortunately been busy. Well, unfortunately for me, but not unfortunately for Ron, of course. It's great news for him, but he's been busy pretty much every weekend the last few weekends with conferences around America. Unfortunately, we don't really get a chance to record our show during the week, so it needs to be on a Sunday evening when we tend to sit down and work together. And unfortunately, he's just simply not had very many free weekends. I myself have been away last weekend, so I wasn't around either. So I've had to dig into my own personal archives and dig up an interview I conducted with a very good friend of mine some time ago. Some of this has been recorded before and it's been played. Parts of it are brand new and are stuff that wasn't used previously. So this is a chance to play a much longer version of an interview I conducted with my friend Richard a couple of years back, which did appear on another show, as I say, a now defunct show. So those of you who know me from my previous incarnation may have heard some of this before, but no one's heard all of it, because, as I say, it's an amalgamation of a couple of interviews I did with Richard on different topics. Put them all together for you tonight. So hopefully you'll enjoy this listen. It's covering a wide range of areas. Both Richard and I have very strong interest in what's termed as the occult, the worlds of mysteries and magic and intrigue. We also share an interest in something called psychic questing, which we'll get into much more detail to during the show. So the first part of the show, we're talking about mysteries of psychic questing. We're also talking about a mutual friend of ours by the name of Andy Collins, who has written a number of books on various occult and esoteric related topics. But so we start off tonight by talking about psychic questing and a chap called the Black Alchemist. So hopefully you'll enjoy tonight's show. Here we go. Hello, and this is the Transatlantic Power Radio Show. As I said earlier, I'm on my own this week. Unfortunately, Ron can't be with us, but I have a very good friend of mine who's basically working both as co-host and my guest this evening. A good chap by the name of Richard Warder, I've known for many years. Richard, would you mind telling our listening millions a little bit about yourself?
Good evening, Andy. I'm a working occultist, folklorist and writer who's been studying various aspects of the occult for the past 30 plus years.
Excellent, thank you very much. And obviously you guys know my own interests in such areas, so we're going to be discussing all sorts of aspects of the occult tonight, including starting with psychic questing, which is something that both myself and Richard have had experience of.
We both met via a chap called Andy Collins, who used to run a group called EarthQuest, who was like the founder of modern psychic questing, if you like. And we were just talking very briefly about a thing called The Black Alchemist, which was the book which we'll come on to a bit later on, that we're both interested in. And this chap here knows quite a bit more than I do about this particular book. But I thought we'd start off by talking about what psychic questing is, Richard. So over to you.
Well, what psychic questing is I can only describe it as getting psychics out the seance room and into the landscape, is the way Andy put it to me, and that is pretty accurate. It's really about using psychic faculties to solve historical enigmas and find hidden artifacts. And although it was Andrew Collins and Graham Phillips who really came up with the term in modern times and coined psychic questing as a term to describe that practice around about 1979, 1980, the actual practice of psychic questing, albeit under a different name, has been going on probably since time immemorial. You've had people like Frederick Bligh-Baum, for example, who excavated the ruins of Glastonbury Abbey in the early 20th century, who got in touch through various mediums with the dead monks of Glastonbury to help him find various archaeological treasures there. There are also quite a few other similar accounts from the 20th century. There's another one, a guy called J. Hamlin Garland, who worked with psychics in America and went out being led to various sites to find some ancient Indian artifacts, which is all recorded. And also you've got other accounts in history, such as the Terma tradition amongst Tibetan monks, which has certainly been going back centuries and centuries. The whole Terma tradition was started by a guy called Padmasambhava, and that involves some very, very strange things where monks would be led out into the landscape to actually plunge their hands into things like waterfalls and even solid rock to pull out physical hidden artifacts. And also some of these artifacts are called mind termers, which are actually hidden texts or scrolls which would be again revealed to them by paranormal means. So psychic questing, although it retains in the modern day all of those parts of it, has actually been around for quite a long time.
Certainly when I know quite a bit about the Glastonbury stuff as well as Bligh-Baum and his original research work on the ruins of the Abbey, and I know that initially he kept very quiet about the source of his information.
Yes, because it was very, very controversial, and he did actually, I can't remember when he actually got kicked off the archaeological dig at some point. I think he did at some point because they got wind of his methods and didn't really like it. It was all a little bit too dark and a little bit too occult for the authorities, I'm afraid.
One of the things you just mentioned about the Terma business as well, though. Terma, and kind of like thought form energy formation as well. Is that a similar kind of thing they were doing as well?
Kind related, but that's really a little bit different. You're probably talking more about tulpas, I think.
Tulpas, yes.
Yeah, rather than termas.
Could be these are generated thought forms. It's easy to say, but
yeah, I would certainly agree that is one very, very valid point. And I mean, ghosts, to be honest, I don't think anybody's ever really going to come up with a fundamental definitive answer of what they are, and they are probably an amalgam of lots of things like that. Partly place memory, partly what you've just been talking about.
Absolutely. So this was basically the background history of the genre, shall we say, of psychic questing. How did the sort of the modernised version with Andy come about?
Really, it was through when he met Graham Phillips, who is, a remarkable psychic, and has also written a number of books, as Andy has. Obviously, you were speaking earlier, Andy, about sorry, trying to confuse the maybe I should call Andy Collins Andrew Collins for the purposes of this. Then we won't cause any confusion. But Andrew Collins met up with Graham Phillips. They put together a magazine called Parasearch around about 1978, 1979, and Graham started to realise that a lot of people had psychic traits and ended up putting together a list of things which he called psigenics. Which were psychic traits which a number of people who were very psychic tended to exhibit.
Oh, this is ringing bells. I remember him talking about
it. And he recorded this in, I think, one of the first Strange Phenomena magazines that the two of them put out at the time, around about 1979, 1980. And they decided to start working with these psychics and just see what would happen. And because they ended up going out, getting led to various places through dreams or visions to find, historical enigmas, and in some cases later on uncover hidden artifacts. The first major one of which is revealed in Andrew's book, The Seventh Sword, and also Graham Phillips's book, which he wrote with Martin Keatman, another guy who was involved at the time, which is called The Green Stone, in which they were led to find a talismanic green stone which was supposedly owned by Mary Queen of Scots, and they're actually led to do that by the finding of an ancient sword which was found in a bridge in Staffordshire.
I remember seeing a TV series, which I'm sure you've seen. I know you talked about it.
Oh, you're talking about The Strange Affair.
Yeah, Robert Symes.
Yes.
That was the first time I ever saw that. That would have been, I was probably still at school. So that was early 80s, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, I can't remember that. It must have been early 80s, I think, or even late 70s possibly.
Well, I remember not the Syme show itself. I remember I was in the sixth form at school, that post school, so I'd been 17 years old. That would have been, God, 30 years ago.
Scary, yeah, when you think of it.
Absolutely, yeah. I never realised at that point I was going to get to know the guy reasonably well, who was involved in the programme. So that was, I know that you've got the two different accounts, essentially. You've got Graham Phillips's The Greenstone, his account of the sword, and then Andy's Seventh Sword came out quite a bit later, but Andy's a much longer book, much more
It is, obviously, Andy, I should say that Andy did, I think it was in a few years before the actual Seventh Sword came out, he did a little booklet called The Sword and the Stone, which kind of outlined
I've got that as well.
his take on the story, because unfortunately, you know, due to some internal politics, Graham and Andy went their own way for a little while, and Graham Phillips continued writing books and also doing some psychic questing with Martin Keatman, and they went on to also do another book called The Eye of Fire, which was a talismanic red stone that they were led to find after the green stone. Whereas Andy, or should I say Andrew Collins, as we're getting that name for tonight, met a very talented psychic in the 80s called Bernard, who sadly is no longer with us, and that led on to the whole Black Alchemist saga, which is undoubtedly Andy's most famous book.
Well, hopefully someone can get Andrew on the show at some point in the future. But going back to the Black Alchemist, because this is what really intrigued me. Just to clear my own introduction to all of this, it turns out to be a mutual friend that we both know, a guy called Jason Roseman, who we both lost contact years ago, said to me, do you want to come along to this talk that Andrew Collins was giving? And I knew very little about it. I think Jason may have been to EarthQuest, or I somehow got involved, and there's another guy called Graham, not Graham, it's a different Graham. He was also there, and Graham and I became very good friends, and he was very much an occult collector like us. But I remember Andrew talking at the place called the Cue Ball at the time. It was our snooker club in Basildon. It was quite funny. I remember about 20 of us there. And I remember he gave us a chance to handle some of the artefacts that were mentioned in the Black Alchemist. I remember holding a particular piece of slate stone that had a symbol on which I knew as the Modus Hieroglyphica by John Dee, something we had talked about previously, and something I'm going to talk about on another show. But that was carved on the stone, and I remember the feeling from the stone was enormous, energy coming from it. It was quite odd. I remember thinking at the time when I listened to Andrew talking, this all sounds like nonsense to me. It just sounded too much like a fairy story. But the artefacts, they had a massive feeling about them. Did you have a chance to examine them in any detail yourself?
Yes, I have done over the years, and certainly the original spearhead, which is the first Black Alchemist artefact, which was actually pulled out by Bernard out of Lullington Churchyard, a very, very small ancient churchyard in Sussex. Had a very, very strange vibe about it, and to be honest, I didn't really like handling them. And I should also perhaps point out at this point that there is a little bit of a differential between what we call black questing, which the Black Alchemist certainly falls into that category, and other types of quests, because within black quests there is, you know, a lot more real danger, both of a psychological and a physical nature to those taking part.
Actually, I can have one or two stories which I will do a bit later on, where I had some direct experience that was probably along the lines of black questing, which I've probably told you about before, the Canterbury Ring business. I mean,
yes. No, I've had fun at Canterbury Ring as well.
We'll come back
just
to
one
that
of those
in a
places,
little
I think.
So can you give us a brief outline of the story? One of the reasons we're talking about the Black Alchemist is it is Andy's most famous book, or Andrew, we will call him Andrew, famous book. It has recently been republished, and it's sort of a chance to actually get hold of what was for a while quite a rare, quite expensive book to buy, but now freely available again, or readily available, which is not free, but readily available via Amazon.com. But yeah, so give us a rough idea of what on earth it was all about.
Well, really, it was the fact that this psychic Bernard picked up a lot of clues to this guy who they could only term the Black Alchemist because of what he was doing, which was actually going around various ancient sites in Essex and other parts of the southeast of Britain, and trying to literally take over the energy matrix of Britain, is what we think he was actually trying to do by planting these artifacts and trying to set up some kind of alchemical chain reaction. And there is no doubt that he was a very, very skilled individual in the fact that he was using techniques which certainly at the time were not readily available in English books.
I think this is predates the internet, anything like that.
Yes, it does, of course. Yeah, exactly. And there were very, very few books out at the time. Well, there've been quite a few come out since, detailing stuff in the Greco magical papyri, which literally, you know, he was using these formulae, but they weren't readily available at the time. And as you said, you know, quite right, Andy, you know, it's pre-internet days here, so it wasn't the fact that you could just go and look something up and, you know, and make it up.
And you know, his local library didn't have many of these.
No, exactly. I mean, whatever this guy was doing, he was, you know, doing it for a very, very serious purpose. He was going to too much effort not to, basically. And the whole idea was that Bernard would keep having these dreams about this black alchemist, and, you know, and contact Andy, and they would end up going out and they would end up finding these artifacts, but literally just being one step behind him, which is, of course, has, you know, led some people to suggest was Bernard the black alchemist himself, although I can categorically say that that is not the case. I mean, Bernard was a married family man with his own business, sadly no longer with us, and there's just no way that he would have had time, you know, to have gone around the landscape planting all these artifacts in various places. You know, just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's a shame, as you say, he did pass away a few years ago. There was actually an audio recording that Andy made discussing the Black Alchemist with Bernard, which
yes,
kind of basically resurfaced recently. I managed to encode it into the MP3, and he sounds like Griff Rhys-Jones, doesn't he?
Yes, no, that was noted at the time, actually. Yes.
Similar sort of sense of humour as well.
Yes, yeah, he had a very, very dry sense of humour, Bernard. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you know, I was lucky enough to meet Bernard a few times when he was alive, and I found him an extremely erudite and extremely intelligent man. You know, and certainly didn't get any kind of vibe from him that he was in any way making any of this stuff up. You know, he seemed very, very, you know, sort of forthright and genuine. Absolutely.
I remember one of the events that everyone recalls that was kind of tied in at the time, of course, was the big storm in '87. So that kind of gives us a date of them, of course, when these games were going on.
Well, yes,
some links in with that, wasn't there?
Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, particularly down in Sussex, because there's been a lot of crossover between some quite dubious material relating to black magic, for want of a better word, in Sussex, and also the Black Alchemist saga. But I think really it was just purely a coincidental crossover there. But I mean, I went down in the wake of the hurricane in 1987. It was, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
To Clapham Woods. To have a look around there, and the place certainly has got a very, very weird vibe to it, but I don't really think it can be, you know, linked to the Black Alchemist saga in any convincing way, apart from just the fact that there are, you know, sort of similarities there in terms of what people have been doing.
But I remember the '87 storm. I was actually trying to walk home in the middle of the night in that, literally being blown along by it. But it was a nasty weather. So what was the kind of outcome, without giving the story away, of course, because obviously you want people to read the book still, but what was the kind of outcome of the Black Alchemist?
Well, I mean, gradually, Bernard decided to try and withdraw, basically, from the whole saga, which I think did mean that less and less was picked up by him. But then he did have, you know, sort of various threats to him, both himself and his family, more pertinently, which he did take seriously, and hence when you start getting, you know, sort of cards threatening you coming through your actual home address door.
So he's actually, this guy was sending things physically to it?
Yes, and also that there were messages left on the cars a couple of times when they came back from, I think it was Shenfield Common, and also one of the places in Danbury, which they were led to psychically to find out more about the Black Alchemist and what he was doing. That you know, people were trying to warn them off, you know, and it did seem quite serious.
I think Danbury was the most disturbed side. Danbury churchyard, to be more specific. I remember an occasion, again, around about the same kind of time, where not long after the book came out and we'd read it with a few friends, we actually, one summer's evening, decided one of us to drive over to Danbury. And I remember it was a warm summer's night, and as soon as you walked into the churchyard at the back, it went bloody cold. It actually went physically cold, to the point that one of the guys, Jim, decided he had enough already, went back to the car, myself, Jason, and someone else, I can't remember who it was with us, so we decided to have a wander around. We didn't find anything, but certainly there was an odd atmosphere about it. But and then there were various things during the time of the Black Alchemist story that were found in the church. What sort of things were they finding?
Yeah, I mean, there was the heart, which was found in the roots of a tree, an animal heart.
The animal, not human. Yes,
not human.
Yeah, not a human went that far.
Yeah, with what is known as the ape dagger through it.
Yes.
Which is obviously done as part of some ritual. And then there was also a very, very ancient sort of Christ figure taken off a cross, also found in, I think, the roots a tree that actually blown over as part of the winter hurricane.
So do you think that was already there, or he placed it in there after it was blown over?
All we can say is that according to Bernard, who obviously found the artefact, he thinks it was placed there after it had been blown over.
Obviously the heart of the reasons it wouldn't have lasted. Whatever okay with the daggers? Andy still got the box?
Yes, Andy still has, I mean, I think Andy still has got, under lock and key somewhere, all the Black Alchemist artifacts.
Yeah.
And certainly as part of the one or two talks he did, previous to the relaunch of the book, he has taken them along for people to handle. He's still happy for people to do that.
I'd love to see them actually. I'll check next week back he's abroad at the moment.
But just if you do that, just brush up your psychic protection first and wash your hands afterwards. Is what I can advise.
Absolutely. But, so what was the final kind of resolution with it, really? Did it all...
There wasn't really a final resolution. This is the problem. I mean, Bernard felt that the Black Alchemist was sort of had broadened his kind of mandate, if you like, and was actually going off round the world doing things. He was picking him up in locations as far apart as South America and France. But nobody really knows what, is happened to the guy. All the people that he was working with. I mean, all of that is, still unwritten, really.
It's going to come on to that. I mean, what do you know of the possibility of being involved with other people? I mean, I know one of the things that Charles Walker's angle was he was involved in the group that he'd been investigating called the Friends of Hecate, but again, whether that was because it had two disparate one group and a person acting around the same time, purely coincidentally it was at the same sort of time, or do you think there was a link there, or is there anything bigger than that?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I think it's probably coincidental, but I can see why, Charles and other people have, made the link between Andrew's Black Alchemist saga and, the Friends of Hecate stuff, because, there certainly are similarities, in some of the sites used, but not so much really in the methods, I would say.
Okay, fair enough. So, what have you been involved in yourself with psychic questioning that you can talk about?
Various bits and pieces over the years.
Well, what was the most unusual thing you've experienced?
The most unusual is probably the finding of the brass pillbox in a tomb in Danbury Churchyard.
Oh, okay. Can you tell us the story behind that?
Well, basically, I mean, it was madness. We'd actually gone out, I think it was somewhere in Thundersley, trying to find an artefact as part of a quest, and we hadn't found it. And this is at the time when Andy was still married to his ex-wife, Sue. And we all came back home quite disillusioned, and after a couple of drinks we just got a bit silly and we thought, oh well, let's just see if we can make something up. So we ended up making up a box, what it looked like and what it contained, and didn't think any more of it until I started to have dreams about this box and started to think that it's somehow taken on a physical reality. And to cut a long story short, I mean, I was at work one day. I was working for Dewson's the Builders Merchants at the time, and I can say this now because I've left and they can't get me in trouble for it. But I was looking for some kind of clue, and there are a lot of number synchronicities coming up at the time around the number 333, which we might need to explain a bit more about later to say what exactly that means in Hebrew gematria and other things. But a guy came in to put some stuff on his building account, and I couldn't find the account anywhere online, and he just said, type in 333. So I did that, and it came straight up. And also I noted that he was on the same road that my grandmother lived, in Malden as well, and I just thought, well, the 333 has come out, that's very, very odd. And then just something happened, it switched something in my head, and I felt very, very dizzy, and I felt that we would be able to get this artefact if we went out on a specific day to Danbury Churchyard, and it had to be at a specific time. I ended up taking the rest of that day off of work. I said I felt I went home and felt that we should go out at 3:33 that afternoon. And indeed we did, and we managed to locate the tomb where I felt this artefact was. I put my hand in to try and find it and couldn't find anything. It was just starting to get those feelings of disillusionment again. As I was pulling my hand out, it was almost out from the tomb. At the stroke of 3:33, we heard something metallic drop. And it was nowhere near where my hand was at the time. Andrew rather I should say, quickly thrust his hand back in, had a feel around, and ended up pulling out this brass box exactly as we described. with 4 angelic heads on the top, some carvings on the bottom, and also had a very, very strange smell about it as well, a flowery smell of some sort of, as if it had some sort of embalming fluid in it.
Okay.
But that, to be honest, is probably the thing that really screwed with my head the most, because up until that point it was like we had made this thing up, but then perhaps then more research needs to be done on the fact that you can actually create your own reality.
Yeah, well, it's
and I think in some way that we had created that reality and managed to pull it into physical manifestation. That's all I can say. I mean, I literally have no answers for it, no concrete answers.
Well, that comes back to what we were saying before, the thought forms before that, and of course the generating objects.
Yes.
Apports, things appearing out of the book. I remember an occasion, because EarthQuest used to meet once a month in Leon C, and in fact I know there was a possibility of restarting. It's been put forward many times. One day
about a year ago it was going to be kicking off again, but unfortunately it hasn't done.
I just beat yes, now I remember specifically this occasion we used to have a talk about something or other, and we'd have a group meditation together, and there was a candle in the middle, and I can remember to this day there was a light. I don't think you were there. You probably were too there. Most of them you could miss.
Yeah, I think from about 1989 onwards I was...
Do you remember this little blue stone appearing?
No, I don't remember that.
I'm sure I remember something. It was like a little light by the candle, and then when you turned the light, there was it sounded like a bit of glass stone type thing, a little bit of glue, bit of blue glass. I'm sure I remember that happening there. I may have imagined it, you never know. I'm sure I remember it happening, but certainly I've never... Well, I've seen Apport's objects appear on ghost investigations. I actually had a stone that came flying across the room that hit me and hit the wall and then bounced off my foot, and it was absolutely red hot when I picked it up, and it come through a group of people, and there was nobody else in the building with us other than the group, and it wasn't one of them that thrown it. So essentially Apport or stone just thrown. But certainly I remember, because of the interest of the Black Alchemist book and Psychic Questing being involved with EarthQuest, as well as going out on a few skits with Andy, we did a couple of crop circles. We also did our own investigating as well. And you mentioned about markings being left on cars. I'd forgotten all about that, because on one occasion we were kind of following up. It used to be me who got a lot of the dream imagery and some psychic imagery. And I forget the full story of how we ended up there, but we ended up at the top of Box Hill in South London. And it was actually a really misty night, and you couldn't see a hell of a lot. But I remember looking out, and it was like there was like a wavy pattern in the sky in the distance. It was like over some area, and at the top of Box Hill there's a semicircle that's got different things pointed out in different directions, and this thing was pointing at Chanterbury Ring. And I thought, well, we need to investigate that. And we did a few nights later. Myself, a guy called Ian James, who always came with us because he was over 6 foot and he was built like a brick house. He was kind of our security, if you like. He was excellent for that. Jason used the driver, who was mad as a hatter, and the guy called Jim I mentioned before, and myself, and there was somebody else who came with us. I forget who it was. Oh, a guy called Frank, a bit doolally, but he was nice enough. But we, so following on from this wobbly stuff we'd seen on top of it, because at the same time Jason saw a blue figure standing to one side of this clearing that we were in. Now apparently this is the ghost of the guy that owned Box Hill, who's buried up there, vertically standing up, coffin buried straight up, and he's been a blue ghost has been seen. Now whether Jason imagined he saw it because he'd read about the story or what, I don't know, but Jason was sure this figure had been there. So we thought we should follow this up, and we went to Chanterbury Ring. Now Chanterbury Ring is a ring of trees on top of an Iron Age fort, on top of a very large hill, Chanterbury Hill, which we've both been to many times. Remember on this particular occasion we drove down, and everything seemed quite normal. You park in a little car park at the base of the hill. There's a road that leads to it, and that just doesn't go anywhere else. It's just a car park. And we parked up there, started to make our way up the hill, and we'd been going a little while, and we noticed there was headlights coming along the road to the car park. And we know that the car park, as I say, goes nowhere else other than to the car park for the hill, the road. And this car pulled up and must have stayed there for a good 10 minutes or so, and then eventually it drove off. And I thought, oh God, maybe they were going to come over as well, and they've seen our car there and decided to go off because they know someone else is already here. We got up to the top, and I remember we were looking around and we found this very large old stump of a tree that had been burnt out inside, and there were symbols, 4 symbols carved on the inside of the trunk. Now I know runes very well. It looked like bind runes. Unfortunately I didn't have a camera with me and didn't draw them or anything like that, which is a real shame, but they look like bind runes, which is a combination of runes put together, as you know. And made a note of that. I thought this is interesting. It's a bit odd. It was relatively recently burnt because you can still flake off the black char. Anyway, we go back down. It had been a bit of a rough night, and the windscreen had a bit of mud and dirt on it. And behold, on the windscreen were the same 4 symbols carved on. They've been drawn on with a finger on the windscreen of the car. So pretty clear that whoever had driven into the car park was the ones who made that burn marks up there.
sense.
Which was like, that was quite interesting. That's one of my more interesting occasions with it. What would you say was your most dramatic event, if you like? Not sure you'll find it, but things being changed on Abbey.
That's quite a hard one. It's going to take me perhaps a moment to think of that. I mean, if I'd have gone on it, it would have been my first quest which Andy did down in Dartmoor, which I was invited to go on, but sadly didn't make it. But that would have probably been a candidate, knowing actually what happened there and the fact that, you know, there was various people sort of chasing them and they had to camp out and finding artefacts and all the rest of it. But it's going to be difficult to actually say the most dramatic one. I mean, to me, the whole saga of the box, which I've already talked about, is the one which sticks in my head because it's just the one that completely puts my head up the most.
You do a physical object.
Because it was a physical object. Yeah. Well, not just that. I mean, I'd actually been led to find, you know, sort of physical artifacts before that, you know, with Andrew and some certain other people that I'd quested with. A guy called Sean York, who now lives down in Dorset. He was with me when we went down to the Repstone Stone Circle, and I found my first, you know, artifact there, which, you know, had come through a dream, and, you know, we went and found that. But I think the box, because it was something which purely we just thought we'd made up. And it kind of shows that, you know, maybe, you know, if you make something up, does it somehow create a physical reality if you believe in it enough?
Yes, yeah.
And therefore, you know, I think it does. And something like that is a bit of a, you know, sort of a difficult to get your head round, because it really makes you start questioning the whole nature of reality and how you perceive it.
Absolutely, yeah, certainly.
And so, just to recap,
So we're doing a little show, myself and my friend Richard here. Now we're currently talking about psychic questing, which is basically the trail of finding objects and information via psychic means across the countryside, across the landscape, quite literally. And we're just regaling a few tales of our own experiences with both, and Richard particularly, but myself as well, know a guy called Andrew Collins, who's probably sort of the figurehead, shall we say, of psychic, modern psychic questing, certainly, although he's moved on to other things, although he's kind of going full circle, hasn't he? Come back to the questing stuff.
Yeah, he has a little bit. I mean, I think Andrew tried to leave psychic questing behind for a while because he was starting to write more straight books, shall we say, on, you know, sort of various sites around the world, like the Göbekli Tepe one that you mentioned, Andy, you know, a little while ago. And he's trying to be sort of taken more serious as kind of an academic, if you like. But sadly, because Andrew is not an academic, he will never be accepted by the, you know, academic establishment. And I think now he's realised the fact that the psychic questing books were popular, and hence fact that he's now re-released The Black Alchemist, and he's also currently working on re-releasing another version of The Seventh Sword as well.
So we'll come back to Seventh Sword definitely in a little while. I have a little tale of adventure that was quite funny, really, with, again, to do with the same kind of quest we were involved with on the Canterbury Ring, although we never found anything substantial. The feeling that we had was that we did interrupt something, that something was going on, someone was trying to cause some kind of realignment of energies, or however you want to put it, but we interfered, and I think we interfered for the right reason. I think the effect we had was to stop whatever they were doing, which probably wasn't for the right reasons. Judging by what happened with our experience at the country park in Kent, I think it probably was the case.
Yeah, I mean, and that probably brings up quite another contentious point about right and wrong reasons, because Andrew Collins obviously has had sort of various dealings with people over the years that do not agree with him going to various sites and digging at artifacts, saying that if they put them there for part of a magical ritual, they shouldn't be removed. And, you know, sadly this is one reason why he never really got on that well in life with the late occultist Andrew Chumley, who's obviously made quite a name for himself with various books like the Azawisha and the Grimoire of the Golden Toad, and sort of revitalising, you know, sort of traditional Essex witchcraft as he saw it.
It's very big
that he would go out and, you know, sort of plant artefacts and would say, you know, I don't want people like Andrew Collins, you know, picking up psychically that they're there, or, you know, and coming and removing them, and that you shouldn't be doing this. So, you know, although psychic questing, you know, does involve a lot of, you know, sort of solving historical enigmas and pulling artefacts out of the ground, there are a lot of people that don't agree with it for those reasons.
I've just suddenly realised something quite interesting. I know one of the sites that was both in the Black Alchemist, and I know Andrew Chumley made use of, was the Running Well in Runwell in Essex. And I went there some years ago when certainly Andrew Chumley was still alive. Andrew Chumley died in
2000 and was it? Oh God,
I can't remember now. It was a few years ago. He died of an asthma attack.
It was, sadly, yes.
And
yes.
I've retrieved an artifact, an interesting object from the well. And I do wonder if it was one of them that Chumley might have left there.
It's possible. I mean,
I'll dig it out later.
the running well, I mean, has been a votive well, i.e. one that has had offerings made at it since Roman times. And I mean, there have been Roman offerings actually pulled out the running well, which Andy has got some of.
Ah, yes.
You know, because
Borrowed
we used to go
acquired.
down there, sort of, there was a Boxing Day pilgrimage a few years back, which went on for a number of years, to actually go to the running well once a year and try and clean it up. But sadly, that was when it was actually owned by farmers that were sympathetic to that.
Yes, that's
and
so
sadly
much,
nowadays they don't want you to go anywhere near it.
Well, the last time I went there with some friends, now bear in mind it's on a public footpath, so it should be accessible at any time, regardless of being private land. This chap had deliberately built two small demountable buildings across the footpath, so you had to walk around these buildings, hence onto his land, and of course he got rather grumpy about that. We managed to get to the well, and we were on our way back when he and another man appeared, and it was dark. I mean, it's dark. We looked forward like a shotgun, so a large stick, and said, "What the bleeding are you doing on my land?" To which he said, "We're visiting the well, she's perfectly fine." Anyway, when we got back to our cars, the police were there. The farmer had phoned up the police, said that several people dressed in black cloaks, I'm not making it up, had gone down to the well, and to which he laughed at us, said, "Obviously you're not." And I said, "This is on public land, this is public footpath." And they said, "Well, he's reported you on his land." And so we had no choice because he'd blocked the path through the buildings, and we reported to the Ramblers Association, but nothing ever came of it. But that was years ago.
Yeah, no, I think the current owners as well, I'm just not
Probably
keen
the
on
same
people going down there. And I mean, you're not the only one who's reported being chased off by guys with shotguns, to be perfectly honest.
Ridiculous.
Sadly.
Going with to one of my experiences, just saying about unusual and potentially unpleasant encounters we had, as again, it was all part of the same kind of adventure, or whatever you want to call it, that was going on after Chanterbury Ring. We were then found ourselves, I must admit, I should have made a much more detailed notes of why, but we ended up at a country park in the middle of the night in Kent. It was just myself and Jason went down there. It was definitely, we felt, was linked somehow to the people who'd drawn on the car. We parked into this car park. There are two car parks at this country park. Middle of the night, it was dark, obviously. We parked in one, and we knew there were cars in the other ones. We knew the people definitely were there. Anyway, we walked through the trees, and we came to a small clearing, and you could see there was a fire burning on the other side of the clearing. There were definitely people near the fire. Now, it could be kids being about for them, to be sure, but something was going on. And the next thing we heard was a loud bang around where Jason's car was parked. Now, Jason had, it was a Volvo 440, so quite a sporty little chap. He had he had the Vauxhall, because it was the 440 that chased it. He had the Vauxhall, and the Vauxhall Astra. It was quite a new one, so he obviously didn't want to get it damaged. So his first reaction was, "What the hell's happening to my car?" So we raced back to the car. Now, bearing in mind it was centrally locked, the passenger door was open and his window was wound down. We thought, bloody hell, this is how they get past the alarm system. Anyway, as we got into the car, we heard another car start up quite quickly. in the next car park over. And a car pulled out, and Jason, being Jason, a bit of a hothead, so he was going to chase after them, thinking that they broke into his car. Anyway, we pulled out onto the main road, and it was a Vauxhall 440, silver one, and it was going off ahead of us, and we were trying to keep up with it, but clearly this person, whoever they were, knew the roads, because they were going quite fast, and you went slow to take the bends, well, we didn't really. And we were chasing them. Now, Jason, being a bit of a nutter, he was sometimes, wanted to basically find out what we were doing to his car. So they went off into a village, I remember that, and they kind of got ahead of us, and we thought we'd lost them. And as we were driving slowly through the village, we saw the opposite end of the village was a big pub with a car park. And lo and behold, parts of the car park, there was the Volvo. Jason stopped the car, very dramatic screech of the brakes, being Jason being over the top. Anyway, the car doors opened and 3 blokes got out, clearly holding something large, like a baseball bat. And they could see us, and we could see them, and we got back into our car, and they got into their car, and then they proceeded to chase us around the countryside for the next half an hour or so. This is rather crazy. We ended up eventually losing them down in Brighton, gone a long way, with these guys behind us. We were like crapping ourselves, laughing at the same time. They were still behind us. They were following us. There's no two ways about it. But we did lose them eventually in Brighton. And drove off, and we kind of just drove around the back streets. We lost them, so we head off home. Then we thought we'd go over to Clapham Wood, which you mentioned earlier on. Lo and behold, parts of the Clapham road leading up to the car, the Wood was the same car, the M440. So there was obviously some kind of connection somewhere going on or something. That was kind of the end of that adventure. I don't know, nothing else happened after that, but that was quite dramatic. I'll never forget that night. First us doing the chase and then being chased. It was ridiculous. But yeah, so it's a strange old world, but certainly I know of other people who've been involved in questing stuff and who found bits and pieces, but often they don't tend to go anywhere, because they don't tend to become that complete stories. They're just
although that said, I mean, Andrew Collins will tell you this. I mean that probably 9 out of 10 quests, do not go anywhere. It's just a simple fact, because the problem is when you have a dream about somewhere, yes, it can check out, but you still don't really know whether you're actually dreaming about something which has actually happened, dreaming about something which your subconscious would like to happen, or what it actually is. And it's only when several sort of bits and pieces start slotting together and some kind of synchronicity forms that a quest will actually start going somewhere. Because as I say, 9 out of 10 quests, just do not go anywhere. They just fizzle out at the end of the day. But you have to follow them up to a degree, because otherwise you'd never get on the quests which actually do go somewhere.
Absolutely, so, certainly.
And also timing is a great factor. I mean, I think a lot of the results Andrew got with Graham Phillips in the early days were because if Graham picked up something, about a site, they would literally tear off there at, sort of 10 or 11 o'clock that night and get back, 4 o'clock the following morning or whatever, even if it was the other end of the country. And sometimes you have to be spontaneous. And I think, one of Andrew's great maxims of, if you're psychic quest, you need to go with the flow, really illustrates that.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, most of us not in a position to suddenly tear up.
Sadly, it's not that easy to do these days, when we've obviously got sort of work to do the next day or whatever. So.
One of the reasons why the guys now, I'm a psychotherapist, I don't start work before 12 o'clock any day, never. So I can start 2 hours in the morning and go off till 4 in the morning and still get enough sleep to work the next day. But certainly, of course, yourself being a book dealer, you've set your own hours really in terms.
Yes, I mean, I'm similar to you. Obviously, I'm a night owl. And I like to sort of work into the night and sort of lay in a bit. So again, for questing purposes, that's quite handy.
Well, we'll come back onto the book thing in a little while, because of course the other thing that's second-hand books in a little while. But coming back to The Seventh Sword, which is the second big book, shall we say, and is written on psychic questing. Can you tell us a bit more about that? I mean, I know it's quite a story to tell in a few minutes.
Yeah, oh my God, yeah. I mean, just considering the actual book when it came out, I think it's the best part of 500 pages, and the actual original manuscript was almost double the length of that for the amount of material that sort of got taken out. But the short version of it is As already mentioned a little bit earlier on, that they were led, sort of by Graham to find this sword in a bridge, a place called the Knight's Pool, and then they ended up getting led on to find this talismanic green stone in a box, which I should say that Graham was the only person present when that was found, in the middle of the night, a place called the Swan's Neck. And there's a whole background story going into sort of, which covers the Rosicrucians, the whole sort of Renaissance, Hermetic Enlightenment and everything else, which kind of established a sort of historical backstory to that, and the fact that supposedly that there were seven swords altogether. Eventually all of these 7 swords did get found, and then there are a number of rituals each year which were psychically picked up, which had to be done to sort of re-put the forces of these swords back in the land, which were done for a period of, I think, from forget the first one, it's on 1993 or 94, I think, up until 1999-2000, when the last ritual was done. And all these were carried out at a place called White-leafed Oak, which was at one time the geographical centre of England, and is a very, very magical place.
Not somewhere I've been to, actually. I'd like to visit one day. I remember one particular that was quite fun. We won't go into the whole story of the Blackout of the Seventh Sword book, because it is quite involved, but it's certainly well worth reading, and he's got a very engaging writing style that you really feel you're part of the adventure, which is one of the things that's really good about the way he writes. And as I say, as far as we know, it's all true, definitely. But the funny thing with the Seventh Sword was that the final sword, for purposes of the book, wasn't found, but it actually had been found, and was not exactly the most dramatically exciting of places, was it, in the end?
No, very, very... I mean, it wasn't dramatic, but there were also some odd kind of things happening around that, in the fact that it actually turned up an antique dealer's at the end of Andy's Road, where he was living at the time.
Yeah, bear in mind the others have been found all over the country.
And it actually come through a guy, an arms and militaria dealer called Jim Pooley, who had a place at Battlesbridge Antique Centre for quite a few years. But the bizarre thing about that was the guy's name to me, Jim Pooley, because Andy had a lot of, shall we say, debacle, for want of a better word, with somebody who a lot of you will probably be familiar with if I mention the name Robert Rankin, who's done a lot of books, sort of fantasy books and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And also wrote about the Brentford Griffin, which is a supernatural creature, which Andrew Collins also wrote a book about. And long before the Seventh Sword came about, and that whole story came about, then there was a character, I think, in one of Robert Rankin's books called Jim Pooley. And in the same series of books, he did also actually immortalise Andrew Collins himself, but I won't actually say what he said about him on a family show, because it's a little bit
it was disparaging, I think.
Yes,
what I'm looking for here.
Good way of putting it out.
Absolutely. So it's one of those things that you kind of fall into the sort of psychic questing stuff, because I was involved, and so I knew Richard originally through the EarthQuest group Andy ran, and then he closed it down, because I know he wrote The Second Coming, which was kind of advertised as a sequel to The Black Alchemist, but it wasn't really, was it?
No, and I mean, and Andrew now acknowledges that, and I mean, although there is a very, very small amount of stuff from The Second Coming has now gone into the relaunched Black Alchemist, the material really he now does view as separate. I mean, most of it came through, a separate psychic, young lady called Deborah Benson, I've known for a number of years, and was Andy's partner for a number of years also, extremely talented psychic, very intelligent person. But it was just a little bit different to the Black Alchemist style of things, and although it seemed like that was being followed up on, and it was to a degree in the style of the questing and the artifacts that were found, it's debatable whether we're talking about two different sets of people doing different things, which I think we probably are. I think they were related in some way in what they were doing, but I don't think they were related as people.
I must admit, I should dig the book out. I've got it sitting over there, but having a look at the runes that were inscribed on the fork. Because one of the artifacts they found, if I remember right, it was a fork that was.
It was, yeah, the Trident Fork, as it was known, which was found in the ruins of Whitby Abbey.
Whitby Abbey, that's it. I must have a look at that actually, because I keep forgetting I did some research more recently on Book on Runes, which I've been writing, and I need to cross-reference some information on those and check them again. But what briefly was the events in the Second Coming? Can you just give us an idea of that? Can you remember?
I've got to be
you weren't
honest.
really involved.
Yeah, I wasn't really involved. I wasn't really involved with the Second Coming events, to be perfectly honest. I know there was, the Dartmoor escapade that I mentioned, sort of earlier, was kind of part of it, where they went down to this stone circle on Dartmoor and ended up finding these boxes with these stones in, which had symbols painted on them, designed to go into the ground at specific times. And that the Trident Fork found at Whitby was some kind of follow-up to that, but that was all surrounding a group which Debbie, sort of coined the People of Hex.
Mm-hmm. That was it, yes.
And that the People of Hex may have been working, sort of with the Black Alchemist along the same lines, but there's certainly no evidence of that. It's all very circumstantial, to be perfectly honest. I think Debbie would agree with that as well. Obviously there was reality to what was going on. The artifacts were found and there was definitely something weird happening, but I don't think it was really linked to the Black Alchemist himself and that original kind of saga of events.
So it was kind of just almost using the name to kind of push the. Well, it's not supposed the name was the cover of the book.
Using the name. I mean,
the cover of the book though.
Yeah,
it's kind of rehashed.
I think the thing was it again fell under the banner of what sort of Andrew would term black questing, which is sort of following up information which leads you to sort of solve enigmas and get artifacts from the ground which have been placed there for sort of nefarious and sort of purposes which disturb the energies of a site rather than are in harmony with it, and therefore also can have detrimental effects on the psychics concerned. And when I've sort of comparatively recently, when I went back down to Sussex with Andy in the wake of relaunching the Black Alchemist, I mean there's certainly still quite a dark aura down there in certain of the places, and it did make me feel unwell. I mean, whether that's purely psychosomatic or whether there's something more to it, nobody can really know. But as I've already said, working with Andy has made me sort of challenge my perception of reality and the fact that we can actually create our own reality. So therefore, it's still valid.
So the other one that I know reasonably well that you were definitely directly involved in was the 21st Century Grail.
Yes.
That was another questing kind of book, wasn't it? The questing was in it, but it was more.
It was. And although there were some interesting artifacts that came out, also one thing which I would like to talk about is when you do psychic questing sometimes, I'm convinced that if there's a quest out there to be got onto and you can find out about it, the universe, in inverted commas, for want of a better way of putting it, will give you a garden in which to play. And the thing is, my garden in which to play at the time was looking very much into some of the thelemic stuff to do with Aleister Crowley, and in particular, surrounding a deity which, he talked about and sort of saw his Scarlet Women as an incarnation of, called Babylon. And the network of geometry that I picked up psychically was all kind of based around that. And I would definitely say that whereas the actual quest for the artifacts and the quest for a cup supposedly owned by Aleister Crowley was certainly real to us at the time, it was certainly the universe giving me a garden in which to play, in which I could perpetuate these energies which were, sort of all surrounding, my interest in sort of Thelema and Babylon at the time.
Excellent. I know. I remember reading some of it was an egg cup was found or something along those lines. That it was also mistaken for being the actual Grail rather than something.
Oh no! I think what you're coming on to here is the fact that I picked up that what we would have as a representation of the Grail would be this cut which Crowley had owned, supposedly. But what happened was that I picked up the fact that Andy's then wife Sue would actually be the one who would actually find it.
Right, okay.
And lo and behold, she was actually given to be custodian of a small cup, which, as you said, Andy, you know, looked, for instance, intents and purposes, like an egg cup, which was actually a thing called the Hawkstone Grail, which Graham Phillips had actually found in Hawkstone Park, as part of his own questing, you know, sort of activities to do with sort of the Grail and King Arthur and things like that.
Right,
but felt for some reason that he should give it to Sue without any knowledge of our current activities.
Okay.
So that kind of became our Grail representation as part of that quest that we got.
Excellent.
But we didn't actually find, you know, the cup that Crowley was supposed to have. I think, you know, yes, we can create our own reality, but I think that was probably stretching it just a little bit too far.
Mr. Crowley or Crowley?
You say Crowley, I say Crowley. I mean, you know,
That's what I think. Yeah, I've always said Crowley, even though it's spelled as
I don't
Crow.
think there's any, you know, sort of hard and fast pronunciation. Tomato. You know, they're both correct.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think there's any real.
Do you think he would have corrected you one or the other if you'd said it to him? Do you think he gave a damn?
I don't know. It would probably depend on what time of his life it was and how off his face on drugs he was at the time.
Sounds about right.
Perfectly honest.
Oh, okay, we're going to take a little bit of a break now.
My life fades, my eyes dim, yet I remember Wasteland Weekend. 4 days of Mad Max-inspired mayhem in the middle of the California desert. Camp out in a live, post-apocalyptic environment in our wasteland compound surrounded by specialty-built sets, vehicles, and performers straight out of Mad Max and other post-apocalyptic movies. This is an adult-only, fully costumed event that includes live bands and DJs, wasteland tribes such as the Mutant Hunters, Dukes of the Nuke, and the Juggers, Thunderdome, combat and stunt performers, post-apocalyptic vehicles, wasteland merchants in Bartertown. Wasteland Weekend,
September 22nd through the 25th in California City, California.
Buy your tickets now at wastelandweekend.com. That's wastelandweekend.com.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Hello, this is Lord Lewis Smythe, formerly of the House of Lords and World Traveler, and I have visited some of the darkest, scariest places on Earth. But nothing is as frightening as listening to Paranormal UK Radio with the lovely Irene Allen Block and that American chap Mark Johnson. So tune in every Wednesday night from 10 to midnight here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Oops, sorry.
The other thing, of course, that we're going to talk about is collecting occult books. Now,
Of course, whilst I am a collector myself and have my own fairly large collection of occult books, you of course take it a step further because it's actually your business, isn't it, Richard? You actually buy and sell occult books as well as collecting yourself.
and have been, what, at least 10 years now, I suppose?
Yes, well, full time since 2005, but I've been collecting since I was a teenager. And I first started selling a few catalogues with Andrew Collins, funnily enough. We did a few lists, you know, sort of back in the early 90s, which was quite successful.
Excellent.
But now, you know, since 2005, I've been doing it as a full-time career.
So what made you turn it into a full-time job?
Just something that I just love and just thought, you know, I can do this. You know, I you know, call it a midlife crisis if you like. The fact that, you know, I don't know what it was. You know, I just decided that I didn't really want to work in the building trade anymore, and decided that I really want to, you know, sort of do full time, you know, sort of working on second-hand books.
So, is it kind of profitable? I mean, second-hand books.
I wouldn't say that. I made far more money when I was working for other people in the building trade. You know, to be honest, selling second-hand books, I think it's more of a vocation than it is, you know, sort of a job to make loads of money out of.
Absolutely, yeah, that's fair
Unless you're at the upper ends when you're sort of dealing in, you know, sort of first edition Crowleys and things like that, which turn, you know, a few thousands of pounds, you know.
So what would you say was the most valuable book you've ever actually sold?
Ooh, that's a good question. I can't honestly think of an answer to that offhand, to be perfectly honest.
I can think of a couple that come to mind that I've acquired from you. Of course, there was a little backstory behind the first public edition of the Key of Solomon, which I acquired from you from a period of time.
Oh yes.
Wasn't intended to have
Yeah,
been sold.
it's probably not the most valuable I've ever sold, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, I mean, it's the most valuable in monetary terms. It's probably no more than sort of a few £100, to be honest.
Still,
certainly,
for a book, that's quite impressive. I mean, the funny little story with the Solomon book was that basically it was swapped for a laptop because yours had died.
That's right. Yeah. So I had to keep on working, so I had to do it somehow. And
Same for a laptop, which unfortunately then died itself.
Yeah.
Died not long afterwards, which was a real nothing to do with me. It wasn't a curse or anything. It was just one of those things. And you ended up getting it back because I now have the Graveyard Wanderers, which is a much more fascinating book for me personally.
Yes.
Is there much of a market for black magic books? Especially as people talk about black magic, is there a big difference? And there's a big market for the books that... What would you say was your best seller that you've had?
Oh my word. Well, I mean,
I suppose
all right. If we start
orders,
if we start on black magic books, then for one thing, I mean, I don't like the term black magic personally.
No, I agree.
I don't think you can categorically divide magic into black and white. All magic is grey, and and a number of other occultists I know, sort of share that view as well.
I think why you can look at it is it's like electricity, and you can use that to power up your TV or power up the torture chamber.
Exactly.
Chair.
I mean, it's how you use the energies, and that's all down to your own moral mindset. And there are certainly grey areas, I would say. I know people that if sort of cursed for reasons which I look at and say, yeah, actually, in your position I would have probably done the same thing.
Absolutely.
So,
but certainly, what would you say was a book that has kind of had hundreds of people or dozens of people suddenly try and buy from you on your list? That's really like, bloody hell, this is like really, or something that's been like, I'm glad I've got this. This is gonna fly out.
I don't know, because sometimes it's books that you wouldn't think. I get, sort of, if I get certain books, I mean, I might only get half a dozen orders, something like that for them. But obviously, there's only one copy. I can only sell it once. But I can't think of any specific. Really. I can't think of any specifics off the top of my head, to be honest. I mean, black magic books do sell, because they've got a little bit of a notoriety. But to be honest, I mean, when you start looking at the content of a lot of them, they're a triumph for style over substance, to be perfectly honest.
Absolutely, as I've discussed in my demonology article, a lot of them are derivatives of each other anyway, and it comes down to maybe 3 or 4 kind of almost original texts, if you like, that have been plagiarised and twisted and distorted. Things like Jonathan Ware's book, the TPRS Team, this is my attempt at pronunciation of the Latin, something along those lines. How would you pronounce it?
Oh God,
it's not easy.
No, it's not. I don't think I'm even going to attempt it.
Okay,
actually.
well, we're still in my brave attempt I mentioned in the book. But that was one of the earliest printed books that you could describe as talking of black magic in the sense of what we were saying before about demonic powers. The appendix that was added later on at the end, specifically naming these demons. But as I talk about in my article, the actual origin of a lot of this stuff is kind of a bit sort of lost in the mist of time almost.
Well, it is obviously, the word demon, as we know, goes back to daemon, sort of in, sort of ancient Latin and Greek sources, which it didn't mean anything evil whatsoever. It's only come to mean that, sort of later on. And I mean, probably going back to sort of witchcraft and traditional witchcraft, you've got, sort of a devil figure, for want of a better term for it, in most of these traditions, but it's not a devil in the Christian sense. Absolutely. I mean, really that sort of angle only really came about with Christianity, sort of, it was a demonisation of the old gods.
Absolutely, and as we were saying again in the article, was the fact that that's one of the ways in which Christianity spread itself. You couldn't just eliminate these other beings, other deities worshipped. So you demonise them quite literally, and make them become the evil forces.
And obviously we know that a lot of churches in Britain are built on pagan sites. It was like, we need to take over this, this energy. We know it's there, so therefore, we will Christianise it.
Absolutely, and we have things like, as again, I keep going back Martin, I know, but you look at in the Bible, there are cases and stories of Jesus helping people who've been possessed by demons, but they never named these demons, they never have any identity. It's undoubtedly, I think, it's examples of psychological, physical illness that he's
it could well be, and to be perfectly honest, I mean, most, going back to the folk magic thing, most, sort of cunning men or cunning folk as they were known, practiced as traditional, sort of English folk magic, would have had a knowledge of, sort of what we would these days call, psychology and psychotherapy.
Absolutely.
But it wasn't looked at in those terms, but it was a very, very important part of what they did, the fact that they could actually read a patient, for want of a better word, that came to them for help, because that was the only way they could help them successfully, is if they understood a little about what was going on psychologically.
Absolutely, as I mentioned again in the article about Freud recognising that Deprestatus Demonominum, I'm trying to pronounce it again, the Ver book behind the Ver's book, was probably the first to really identify the possibility of psychological illness being the cause of so-called demonic possession. And Freud says it's one of the 10 most important books ever written for that reason, because it is actually attempting to say, this could be
and
all in the
obviously
mind.
you've got others like Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, it's another one probably,
yeah.
worth stating, which I think came out in the
16
something,
yeah,
17th
yeah,
century.
a little bit later on, but yeah, again, it's going down that road actually of saying, well, look, at the time these people were writing, particularly about the so-called demonic possession, they had no knowledge of psychological illness. I mean, something as simple as an asthma attack, where someone appears to be being choked to death, can be seen as being possessed by a demon. It's just asthma, which we recognise as being easy treatable with an asthma pump now.
Well, yeah, I mean, take the example of Andrew Chumley, for example, who sadly sort of died not that many years ago for an asthma attack, at a tragically young age. It shocked me the amount of occultists, in inverted commas, that came out the woodwork shortly after his death and say, I cursed Andrew Chumley and was responsible for his death. And I just thought that was a very sad person.
Absolutely. In fact, we both know someone who was terrified that he may have been the cause himself as well, saying exactly the same sort of thing. He said it privately, but if you recommend one particular book, what would you recommend?
It depends what subject you want to look on. I mean,
it's vast.
I don't think there is really a good general book on the occult.
Yeah.
Because it just wouldn't do the subject justice. You'd have to really sort of be a little bit more specific.
It's like saying, if you want to recommend one book on science, what would you recommend?
Yeah, exactly. It is too vast, I think.
I think if you wanted to look into Western traditional, Hermetic magic, I think, would probably be the way, rather than the traditional folk magic, the Hermetic high magic, I would say, you look at something like the Golden Dawn complete works as a starting point, other than follow.
Or if you want something purely historical, something probably like Thorndike's History of Magic and Experimental Science.
That's true,
you probably couldn't do better than that for a complete overview.
Although if you want to be more practical, you'd rather bore you to death.
Yes.
I would say, people often deride Francis Barrett's The Magus, and I think it's an excellent book. It's all nicked from other sources, but as a collection, I think it's a brilliant book for sort of just give you a grounding, even if it was written back in 1801. And it kind of brings us a bit full circle, talking about folk magic again. One of the most important characters, if you like, or historic figures in folk magic is a chap called Cunning Murrell, who was
Hadley, actually.
Literally no more than 15
well,
minutes.
actually, I think he was born somewhere else in the borough of Rochford. Actually, I don't think he wasn't actually born in Hadley, but that's where he's most well known and associated with, because he spent the biggest part of his life in Hadley when he returned from London.
Well, he was certainly local, shall we say, to Essex, South Essex, where we are now. We will leave either side of him basically, but he's. We don't know much about what's left of his material, but one thing we do know is he probably did have a copy of the Magus, because amongst the few pieces of paper that were left, because a lot of his paper was lost, wasn't it, or destroyed, was hand-drawn images that definitely from the page of the Magus, which is quite interesting. So
there's no doubt that he took, but then that was kind of common for, cunning folk of the day to sort of pull material from these published books. I mean, if you go back to things like Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft, which came out in the late 16th century, when the third edition of that came out in 1665, a lot of cunning folk and witches took that because the appended material, 2 books of Devils and Evil Spirits, and also some extra material added to the 15th chapter of that book, form a complete grimoire of folk magic, basically.
Absolutely. I mean, that was one I'd recommend if you can get hold of a copy of the third edition of Discovery of Witchcraft.
Yeah, that's the one you really want.
Yeah.
If you're going to have a copy, that's the one you want.
Material in that. Again, it's source material. There are, and the trouble is with it is the one that gets reprinted the most often is the first edition, which is lacking a lot of material.
It is, yes.
It's the third edition, which I've got the EP publishing edition, which one was about 100 quid's worth. And this chap here has got the original, well, not original, but the 1886 Nicholson edition, which sells for 4 figures now. And I'm trying to price it on his hand, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. It's a fabulous piece of work, it really is. But it's one of those books that really deserves much better credit and should be more readily available than it actually is. And there is an Indian company who've recently reprinted a nice little hardback version, but it's so bloody small. You need a magnifying glass to read
your
some
copy,
of it,
obviously, and you do need a
hard to
magnifying glass,
read.
unfortunately. But,
Just a quick question: what drew you into the subject in the first place, and where does your passion lie?
Well, if you're talking about what drew me to the occult, for want of a better word, in the first place, it's probably growing up. 2 things. The fact that my father used to have a lot of weird interests, but was in no way practically interested in the occult, but used to talk to me about a lot of strange occult things, and sort of gave me my first little bit of magic to do, which freaked out of me. And also the ancestry on my mother's side, in the fact that my great-great-grandmother was, for want of a better word, termed the local midwife, who used to go round the farming communities in where she lived in Tiptree and Tulloch, a little place in Essex, and sort of, do sort of healing for people, and basically did live her life by sort of superstitions and things like that, and folk magic. So that's kind of in the background of my family, and both of those things, as I was sort of, growing up sort of as an influential sort of, teenager, I think had quite a profound effect on me, and kind of started me off on the strange path I'm on now.
For me, it's a total bleeding mystery where my interest came from. It's my actual family. I have no interest at all. It's just me. But I distinctly remember having some very strange dreams in the early 80s that turned out to be a representation of what's called the Kabbalah. I remember this dream of spheres, and I literally saw like the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life symbol in the sky, and I came across Dion Fortune's Mystical Kabbalah book and read that and thought, bloody hell, I've been dreaming about this thing. That was particularly freaky. But I did find out later on that my dad's grandmother, he lived in South Wales, she was the wise woman, the cunning woman, of the village, and she used to be the one that people would turn to.
And I don't think that's particularly uncommon, to be honest with you. I think that if you look back in sort of family history, there's probably somebody in there in most people's families that actually practiced folk magic in some way, because it was purely, sort of a way of life, particularly the healing side of it. If you go back into the 19th century, you didn't have the National Health Service like you have now, and the same doctors you have now, and you would have had to make do with these things. And a lot of, obviously, sort of what was herbalism then and what was termed occult is now, sort of accepted by mainstream science.
Absolutely. So the herbal remedies and the basis of all modern medicine start off as herbs that have been worked in and experimented with and synthesised. But for me, I've kind of adopted cunning moral. James Morrow was my adopted grandfather, because my personal story is a little strange. I don't have a grandfather. Exactly. it's a long story as to why not. So I don't have a maternal grandfather. So Cunning Morrow is my maternal grandfather. I've decided that some time ago. But Steve's asking, what's your specific area of passion?
What, in sort of occult books, or what?
The occult itself. Now, one of the things we should say is that occultists tend to be quite secretive about what they do, and not necessarily talk about it. So you might not answer these questions, so just be aware. But what's your area of interest?
Well, I'll answer the question, but I'm going to be a little bit sort of perhaps veiled. I mean, certainly one of my biggest passions is indigenous Essex folk magic, for the reasons I've said, because there is, you know, some kind of family history behind it. There's a lot of other stories to do that with, actually I'm not going to go into tonight, I'm afraid.
That's right.
And also I'm extremely interested in Afrocentric religions as well, and the way they've sort of come out across the world, things like hoodoo, voodoo, obia and things like that, because they just seem a much rawer form of magic than, you know, a lot of the modern sort of magics in this country. If you take Wicca and things like that, you know, they're you know, I'm not going to diss Wicca at all, because, you know, as a religion, you know, there's a lot of people follow it, they get a lot out of it, and that's fine. But it's a very, very dumbed down and synthesised version of the kind of, you know, what I would call more traditional magics. And it is really, if I wanted to put, you know, what interests me the most under a huge banner, it would be traditional magical systems rather than something that's been modern and synthesised. And in the case of Wicca, obviously, you know, only been with us, you know, since the late 1940s at the earliest.
Yeah. Despite Gerald Gardner's the founder trying to claim it.
Despite his claims that, you know, he was part of a medieval witch lineage, you know, I'm sorry, but, you know, all you Wiccans out there, I apologise for this, but that's complete.
Absolutely. It's interesting that someone's actually, there's a TV programme said a little while ago that it's the only religion that Britain's given the world, which I think is something at least.
It is, you know, although probably, you know, a little sadly, it's more embraced in America these days than it is in Britain.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of the rebellion against Christianity, isn't it, in America? Because Christianity is a much more powerful influence on the
lives
of
obviously you've got, you know,
Americans,
sort of parts of, you know, the deep south in America where, you know, if you talk about witchcraft or anything like that, you know, they'd probably still like to want to, you know, sort of put on a white robe and burn you.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a little question it's been discussed previously, but I want to get your take on this as well. We've had a guest in the past, you've said that the Vatican holds dark, sinister manuscripts of magic and the like. Now, I'm very much of the opinion that that's a load of rubbish, and that basically it's the other way around, that the Vatican may have acquired some of these manuscripts, that they already existed, they weren't sort of Vatican generated, or the fact is they've been able to hide them because they've been out there. They've we'll have our copies of X, Y, Z, but I don't think there are any dark manuscripts of satanic evil that the Vatican are sitting on.
No, I mean, but then again, we don't know. I mean, you know, if ever I could do, you know, a fantasy supermarket sweep, as it were, just give me a trolley and let me loose in the Vatican Library for a couple of hours, and I'd be a happy man.
Have a bit of fun with it.
You know, I mean, certainly they hold an incredible amount of occult lore in their library, but as you say, Andy, you know, I don't think, you know, that it's, you know, been purely invented by them. It's just been acquired over the years. I mean, you know, I know a lot of, you know, sort of theologians and, you know, sort of people, you know, connected with the Church of England that have, you know, occult materials in their library. You know, I don't think that's anything particularly uncommon.
I know for a fact that St Paul's Cathedral I used to work at, they had a bit of a clear out a few years ago, and actually did surreptitiously sell off quite a few older, more valuable tomes that included things like the Discovery of Witchcraft, and they had a copy of that, and I think books along those lines from
doesn't surprise
me, 17th, 18th century. But I mean, if you want the sort of the dark, diabolical magic, bloody, the books are out there. Go out and buy them. You know, the Grand Grimoire, the Black and the Red Dragon, they're all readily available.
They are, Sadly, only they sort of date from the 19th century.
Yeah, of course, they're derivative of the early material. As I said in the article, the earliest I've been able to identify as being published, now they're handwritten manuscripts, of course, but published is the Goetia. That's the earliest I've actually managed to identify as being a published manuscript that contains both spells, sigils, and names of demons. Earlier than that, there are some handwritten manuscripts are floating about, which obviously is where people like Johann Wehr got their list of names from. But the Goetia seems to be the first one that really pops up. It's now part of a collection with the Legomaton, which is the Lesser Key of Solomon, which is the counterpart to the Greater Key, which we were talking about earlier on, which I acquired from you because of a laptop. But texts that exist that really go into this kind of information. But again, it's very Christianized, isn't it? It's very much the Christian concept
Yes,
of
it is.
evil and the devil
is.
living as an actual being. Whereas we both know that earlier texts, there isn't that straight division between good and bad, is there? It's
No, and I think that may have been, sort of due to the fact that the law changed in Britain, as for want of a case in point, sort of that magic had always been against the law since Anglo-Saxon times. But then I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was at some point in either the 16th or 17th century that it became punishable by statute, and it became a much bigger crime, and therefore you started to see a lot of these texts coming out which were dealing with sort of magic, but angelic magic, and making this very clear division between things which were under God and things which were under the devil.
Yes, this is the division
which didn't exist prior to that, really.
And yet if you point out this fact, which is absolutely a fact to a lot of people, they'll say, well, no, there's always been this kind of this side and that side, and these ancient texts in the 12th and 3rd and 4th centuries talking about, no, it's where they've been rewritten and retranslated from the originals. There seems to be a lot of Grimms out there, but is there a true one? The answer is really no.
Well, the answer is in name, that there is a book called The True Grimoire.
Grimorium Verum, yeah.
But that's not the first.
No.
That's not the first grimoire, and even that we can see its antecedents.
Yeah,
so I'm sure that what you say, Andy, is correct. I mean, but then again, obviously, you can go back to sort of spells, in the sort of Greco-Egyptian magical papyri.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it depends how far back you want to go, and whether you want to go back, sort of prior to the, the written word. I mean, spellcraft has existed, since Stone Age times, where man would paint, images of bison on cave walls with people chasing them in order to, sort of create a fruitful hunt.
Absolutely. I mean,
magic has always been used.
You could describe something like the Egyptian Book of the Dead as the magical papyri of Anu. It's actually got magical spells in it. You can describe that as being a grimoire. I mean, the grimoire is just a term of a book of spells, essentially. I think it's a bastardisation of the word grammar in French, I think, something along those lines. I remember reading somewhere in my research where just a term, grimoire, has become very much... It rolls off the tongue, is it? Grimoire.
It does.
Sounds impressive. Yes. I mean, the proper early ones that all really date from the 15 and 1600s that are kind of genuine, if you like. And I said the veritable Key of Solomon is probably the most interesting. There was one that popped up fairly recently that had been around for a long time that wasn't recognised as being as important as it actually is, because it was thought to be just a book on water magic. That's the Hygromentia, which I never quite pronounced properly. But the research that was done on it actually identified it was probably the source material for a lot of the other grimoires. And certainly the two Solomon books, the Greater Key, I should say, has definitely been derived from the Hygromentia. And the interesting thing was, the book itself was discovered in a monastery in Greece. And what was happening was that the monks were using old leather-bound books as cushions to pray on, to kneel on. And this guy came visiting and basically found this one and had a look at it, and suddenly realised there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. But this is actually quite a seriously important individual book. Again, it only goes back to 1500s. It's not older than that, but it certainly looks like it predates certainly the Greater Key of Solomon. I mean, the Lesser Key, the Goetia, is the earliest part of the book, the Lesser Key. So that was quite an interesting one. It's been recently reprinted as well.
From the Golden Horde,
the Golden Horde series of books. So I suppose if you want to get kind of intellectual and a really good understanding of the history of these books, as well as the books themselves, the series of books, the Hermetic Sourceworks, the Golden Source, what they're called. No, the Golden Horde series.
It's Hermetic Sourceworks series.
Yeah, Hermetic Sourceworks series. Yeah. It's a series of books that have been published by Stephen Skinner and early ones with David Rankin. There's 8 in the series at the moment. They are well worth getting hold of. And they're not cheap, they're 20, 30 quid each, and they're nice hardback books. But they will give you a very good overview. Those two, particularly Stephen Skinner, is a fantastic researcher in this area, isn't he?
Yes.
Brilliant researcher. He's not written specifically a book on grimoires,
But all the books he's done, which are reprints of grimoires, have included lengthy examinations and introductions to the books with lots of detailed information. So Stephen Skinner's books are well worth getting hold of if you really want to get into the field.
I probably would add as well that Owen Davies's recent book on grimoires is a great source for the history of these books for anybody who wants to, a historical overview of the subject.
Absolutely. So Skinner's book will give you both a history and the actual magic itself in his books. Interesting, I'm actually Facebook friends, as people often are with various people, and I was talking to Stephen Skinner recently because the Sourcework series itself at the moment appears to be on a bit of a hold, and he just said that, asked why that is, and he just said there's just so much other stuff going on at the moment, because his most recent book is fantastic. It's the Greco-Egyptian book of magic, which is based on the, you said the name just now? No, I can't remember.
Greco-Magical Papyri.
Greco-Magical Papyri in translation.
By Betts.
Which is one of the, again, early source work of Greek magic. Now, it's still, his book is modern. The Greek manuscripts are ancient. They're not the same kind of thing as the Goetia, or they're not really grimoire material as such, but they are very important as early examples of magic, as we were talking about previously. That goes back a long way. And Stephen has done a fantastic book of examining the papyri, because the William Beck's book is not easy to follow, is it? It's kind of a little bit all over the place.
Well, I don't know, I found it alright.
Okay, it's easy to follow, so I don't know why Stephen's bother writing this book. Now, Stephen's is more kind of systematic approach of how to get through this kind of stuff, which the Betts, sort of Greco-Magical Papyri book is, it's purely just a compilation of text with notes. It's a very scholarly book rather than a practical book. It's probably well, Skinner's book's turning into a much more practical manual of magic, so that's particularly impressive. So, try and summarise an interest in magic is not the easiest thing in the world to do, because it's just a vast, huge subject. Some areas that would have been regarded as magic 200 years ago would be seen as science today. Science
has been gradually catching up with magic, in my opinion, over the years, and now with breakthroughs in things like quantum physics and quantum theory, is now explaining from a scientific viewpoint why magic works.
Absolutely, yeah. It shows that nothing is what it seems like. Absolutely nothing at all. Objects are not solid at all.
It's making sense of that as well from a scientific viewpoint.
Again, the Vice Versa talks about us being basically pure energy, and what we know sort of from physics now is that matter and energy, there is no separation. Matter is just very, very condensed energy. And ultimately, the smallest level, we are just energy waves, and there's no separation between me and the thing next to me. It's just an illusion. There's a song, wasn't it? An illusion.
So, Richard, yes, we've been talking about various aspects of book collecting and about the occult and grimoires of magic, but I understand, of course, you yourself have written a book which has now been published. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Indeed I have. It's called Echoes from the Primal Grimoire, and it was published by Von Zoz in America, who published a lot of sort of art grimoires and stuff like that, and it's all about the strange world of English occultist Kenneth Grant, and the way he used various magical systems as a hybrid in what he called the Typhonian current, and all about how that relates and the interplay between science and magic, which he looked at probably before a lot of other people.
Just for our listening audience, how would you define the term current? What does it actually mean?
I would term the current as something which has been around for a long time, but it's looking at various strands of magic which have a certain resonance with each other, which is what Grant really looked for when he was looking at things like Aleister Crowley's Thelema, occult pretensions in the work of various fiction writers like H.P. Lovecraft, Arthur Machen, J. Brodie Innes and people like that. And it's about the resonances that he saw each of these systems in having in common.
And some underlying connections, would you say?
Yes.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating stuff. I know a little bit about quantum physics, and we have talked on that previous show, I think, about the idea of alternate realities and how we could be intermingling with different realities. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
It is, yes. Particularly how quantum entanglement, or what is now known as quantum entanglement, has explained a lot of magic and occult results.
So particularly the idea of the entanglement. You have two particles who are separated by a great distance but yet can seem to be interacting with each other, and if one is affected one way, the other one is similarly affected, although there's no actual contact between the original particle, or wavicle, of course. We don't get too deeply technical, but obviously the idea of particles, objects and energy waves, the whole division collapses at the subatomic level, and of course that's what makes it so interesting for us. But so how did you first get interested in this particular area of Kenneth Grant?
Well, I really got interested in Kenneth Grant through reading the fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, and how he basically had a very, very rationalist and scientific background. Lovecraft was not an occultist at all. He did very, very little occult reading. He had one or two basic occult books, such as the Encyclopedia of Occultism by Lewis Spence in his own personal library, but he was really a rationalist and was very fascinated in actually looking at early quantum physics and how it worked and how it might give him ideas for his stories and how his characters might interact through that.
Excellent. Well, if you've not heard of H. Lovecraft before, he's an American writer, predominantly in the 1920s, who wrote what's referred to as the Cthulhu mythos, a series of short stories, and actually shorter novels, all based around a series of stories based on these trans-dimensional, possibly evil beings from other realities. It's a kind of mixture of science fiction and horror. It's not your straightforward devil and demons from hell type stuff. It's more otherworldly, other reality based, and it's become very popular. So it's always been a kind of undercurrent writing. It's not been massively successful, but there are a number of different films have been made based on, at least partly based on Lovecraft stories. There was, funny enough, Rich and I were talking earlier today, there are no very good films based directly on a Lovecraft story, but he's inspired quite a few famous writers like Stephen King, for example, and director John Carpenter to produce films that are Cthulhu-esque, shall we say, that are that kind of same idea.
John Carpenter.
John Carpenter, yeah. What did I say?
Carter.
Oh, John Carter. 3, 2, 1. In particular, writers such as Stephen King and the director John Carpenter, who've been very much inspired by the Lovecraft ideas and created stories of a similar vein, but not exactly filming Lovecraft's own films. It's some absolutely fascinating material. I mean, there are schools of thought, the Necronomicon, which is the supposed book of black magic grimoire, again, as we were talking about before, that a lot of the Lovecraft stories are based around is actually a real historic grimoire, but there is really no evidence it ever actually existed as independently of Lovecraft stories. And in fact, Lovecraft made a very definite statement in one of his interviews, I think it was, or at least an article, that there was no such thing as a Necronomicon. He had made it up. Yet other people have claimed to have uncovered the real, true Necronomicon, and it's a bit of a grey area. There are, I mean, when you look at the Necronomicon itself, it's got kind of Babylonian, Sumerian kind of spells and deities sort of mentioned. So you could say indirectly there are versions that exist in the older spells from those core parts of the world, but they're not really directly Cthulhu based.
There's nothing really to do with Babylonian stuff in Lovecraft.
You think so?
There isn't.
Okay.
You tell me where there's Babylonian stuff in Lovecraft.
I don't know, well enough to know that.
There isn't any.
Well, some would claim, well, we've got that,
I mean,
Mesopotamian
Lovecraft used certain extant pantheons of deities, but he didn't use Babylonian. That all comes from the Simon Necronomicon.
Okay, well that's fair enough. I mean, because it's fiction or nonsense, I've not bothered looking at very much of it. I mean, there is a book that came out fairly recently called Mesopotamian Magic, which appears to have a version of Necronomicon in it,
which is also other sections include stuff from Babylonian and Sumerian, because that's that sort of pinky purple book I've got. It was a self-published, the good old Vanity Press nonsense again, publishing rubbish, unfortunately. But there has been attempts to link the two together, but the beings and deities in the actual Necronomicon of the version that would have existed, if it existed, that Lovecraft would have used, they are their own independent beings, of course. So, 1, 2, 3. There we go. What else can we talk about? I've literally got 10 minutes to fill.
I suppose we could talk about versions of the Necronomicon if you wanted. Would that help?
Yeah, I suppose so. So yeah, 3, 2, 1. So basically we're talking about the idea of Necronomicon, although not existing as a real grimoire of magic. We've been talking about genuine grimoires earlier on this evening, but this one being a variation on the idea. I mean, are there published editions that would claim to be the Necronomicon?
There are. I mean, the first book, which actually wasn't a published version of the grimoire, was Lovecraft's own History of the Necronomicon, which was a fictional piece which he wrote, I think in the 20s, but wasn't published until 1936. And then after Lovecraft's death, a writer called Mark Owings penned, although some people say it was actually really penned by a guy called Jack Chalker, a book which was a study of the Necronomicon, which treated it as if it was a real grimoire. And then as we come into the that was published in the late 60s, and then as we come into the 1970s, there are a number of Necronomicons that came out. The first one was by Lovecraft's biographer L. Sprague de Camp, which came out in 1974, published by the Owlswick Press. But apart from the English preface, it's a fairly nonsensical Arabic language, which has been shown to be very repetitive in parts and not really meaning anything. And according to the story, Sprague de Camp failed to get the piece fully translated because a number of accidents supposedly met people who were working on the project.
Oh dear.
In its original language of Duraic, supposedly, and it is clear that Sprague de Camp's whole Iraqi setting and the way he portrayed this Necronomicon owes a lot to the film The Exorcist, which came out in that same year.
Film we've talked about before in a previous show.
Indeed we have. And really that opened the floodgates, and then in 1977 the most popular rendition of the Necronomicon was published, which by Slangcraft, by a mysterious guy called Simon, whose identity is not clearly known. A lot of people have pointed the finger at American author Peter Lavender,
which there's quite a lot of evidence as
which may be true, although my own opinion, as is the opinion of certain other Lovecraft scholars such as Daniel Harms and John L. Gauntz III, that the character Simon is actually a conglomerate of a number of people working under a single alias and put together a working grimoire, admittedly, but with a lot of mixing of both Sumerian and Babylonian texts, throwing bits in of Kenneth Grant, who I earlier mentioned, along with Aleister Crowley and various other people, and a lot of people have actually got some very interesting results by using the grimoire. But again, it's nothing to do with Lovecraft's original creation.
Actually, what I was referencing there, perhaps not the correct to say deities, but certainly the style of magic.
Yes.
You're just saying there owes a lot to the ancient Middle East. The other version, which I know of course, is the one that supposedly links it to John Dee, which is supposed to be a translation of the Liber Legoeth, which is this chart of the numbers grids that were used to create the actual Liber Legoeth, which is used by Dee and Kelly to
but to find Enochian cores. I mean, I did a show a little while ago on that topic, and it's something we'll probably return to later on in more detail, because I mentioned it briefly. But that was supposed to have been a translation that's supposed to produce the Necronomicon, but even though people such as Colin Wilson were involved in the project, it was actually completely fictional. Although it was, at the time, was to be quite genuine, and George Hay, I think, also involved.
There was a number of people also. Historian Christopher Frayling was involved.
Yeah.
Angela Carter was involved, and the person that actually translated supposedly the cryptogram, David Langford, who eventually came out later on and did admit that it was a hoax.
Which is unusual for the people who were genuinely involved in it, so that they would have to be involved in such fakery. But then it's the Necronomicon.
Yes, and I mean, I think it was these people that gave the text its initial credence, particularly people like Robert Turner, who have later gone on to publish many versions of these translated texts, which are genuine.
Yeah.
So people obviously looked to his work there and thought, well, this could be genuine as well.
Well, I think the myth that John Dee was somehow involved in the Necronomicon goes further back, doesn't it? It was mentioned, I think, in one of the stories.
It was mentioned by Lovecraft in his own history, in which he says that there was a version published in Antwerp in, I think it was 1517, which was an incomplete version translated by Dee, but never published, and supposedly didn't survive, I think.
But again, Dee's records are very meticulously kept, his own diaries and his records of his library, and there's no such book ever mentioned in those. And if it's not in Dee's collections listings, the chances are he never had it. So just going back to Kenneth Grant.
Kenneth Grant was the sort of kind of the founder, really, because it's a bit of a complex story, isn't it, basically? But he ran a version of the organisations that Crowley had set up or had taken over.
Yes, I mean, it was all a bit contentious, the fact that sort of Grant set up the Typhonian OTO, which is a branch of the Ordo Templi Orientis, but then you've got the Caliphate OTO in America, which basically said nobody else can call their organisations OTO, so therefore Grant's own became the Typhonian Order. But he still founded more or less on the same kind of principles, looking into a lot of stuff what Crowley looked into, Eastern mysticism, sexual magic and things like that as a basis for it.
It's, again, a lot of people tend to come across Aleister Crowley or Crowley first of all when they get into the occult. He's probably the most visible figure, shall we say. But he's one of those chaps that I think his publicity is such that it belies the real person behind it. I think if you certainly read any of his magical writings, it's not this demonic, beastly, baby-eating monster that he's often portrayed in the media, is he? It's,
No, I mean, you know, let's not beat about the bush. I mean, you know, Crowley wasn't a particularly nice man. You know, I mean, he was, you know, terrible attitude to women, total misogynist, didn't treat people very well. But at the end of the day, he was an incredible occultist, and he did actually relish the fact that he was seen as the wickedest man in the world, and he did play up to that. You know, he loved the fact that the media turned him as such, that you know he was that most evil man in the world, and he played up to that. You know. That archetype.
So you believe of any publicity is good publicity, no matter how bad.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I mean, we do have certain things to thank him for. It was down to him that the Golden Dawn, who was probably the biggest instigator of the rebirth of modern occultism, actually their material became readily available to the public, because it was all very secret at first, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I know that Crowley published a lot of their material in his series of books called, it's a magazine basically, The Equinox. And that the whole thing went to court in the end, but because the Golden Dawn had never actually copyrighted their material, then there was nothing to stop Crowley publishing it.
No, exactly. I mean, if you take, you know, sort of Crowley's book of correspondence, 777, I mean, that's pillaged wholesale from Mathers. You know, MacGregor Mathers, who was obviously, you know, one of the leading knights of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah,
you know,
so if there'd been no gold,
two of them had a magical battle.
Absolutely, yeah. Had there been no Golden Dawn, there'd be no Wicca movement, there'd be no modern rebirth of occultism at all, really. I mean, the spiritualist movement came around about the same time, which I'd say a lot of our
a little earlier, really.
Well, I suppose they were earlier, but certainly the popularity of things like the Theosophical Society was still the late 1800s, wasn't it? That was when it
Late 19. Late 18. Late 19.
That was kind of an explosion of interest.
Yeah.
There was the kind of airy, fairy, mystical side, like the Theosophical, and the more kind of practical I suppose the more practical magic, I suppose, of the Golden Dawn.
I mean, although that was probably precursored by, the studies of Levi and people like that.
Yeah, Levi, definitely, yeah.
And the fact that, there was another, sort of proto-Golden Dawn order called the Order of Eight, which not a lot is known about, which, sort of was formed, and kind of out of the ashes of that came, what we know as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which I think was formed in 1888.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing Jack Ripple's running around doing his deeds.
Yeah, strange enough.
No connection, I have to emphasise, and we've had that discussion before about the occult and Jack the Ripper, no link whatsoever. But the other one that chap interests me particularly is a guy called Frederick Hockley, who, had he lived, would certainly been a major light of the Golden Dawn. Unfortunately, died kind of about the same time they were founding them. And he may well have been responsible for a lot of their early material. I mean, I know there's...
Undoubtedly was. He was a member of the Order of Eight, I suppose.
Yeah. I didn't know that. Okay. Because I know he's probably... Because the Golden Dawn was supposedly based around this manuscript that was found inside a book that was bought in Portobello that was based on the German organisation. Now, any attempt to find the German, because the Dummerung and the German Golden Dawn, they don't exist. They never have existed. There's no trace of them. And it's been suggested that what it was actually found is actually written by Hockley.
The
exactly. The cipher manuscripts with the foundation of the Golden Dawn rituals was probably at least co-written by Hockley, I believe. And Hockley's always fascinated me, and a lot of his material was unavailable for years, but is gradually more and more of his books are being published, which is fantastic. And there's one of his I haven't got, which I missed unfortunately, is Experimentum, which is a very limited edition, very expensive book, but most of his other material I managed to acquire over the last few years, so I'm very pleased with that myself. But we have our joint interest area really is the sort of folklore magic, isn't it?
It is really traditional folk magic of of this country, really.
Yeah, which is seeing some of a resurgence. A lot of books are popping up. I mean, I'd say that Chumley is partly responsible for its rebirth, but
undoubtedly
other writers that deserve credit are people like Jim McGarry, whose books have come out from Troy Books, many more recently, has perpetuated and kept the interest moving forward and keeping it divided from the Wicca field, which is, I mean, it's not a problem, but I think it's like Catholicism versus Protestantism. If you're a Christian, you're one or the other. You don't necessarily believe both. Well, obviously ideas cross over, but you wouldn't really see yourself in both camps. And I think it's not a Wicca versus traditional. It's not a versus, but it's an alternative. And I think it's in a funny way where Gerald Gardner wanted to make his authentic historic organisation, which clearly it's not. The traditional witchcraft itself, proper folk magic, has got a tradition to it, a history to it. So again, it's kind of scattered around with various texts, but there's a kind of traceable line. But by the same token, someone who calls them a traditional witch is not necessarily going to worry about having generations of connection with historic witchcraft in their family from decades back.
Well, no, and I mean, sort of historical studies like, sort of Owen Davis's book on, sort of cunning folk has shown that rarely, if someone was a cunning man in their family, or a witch or whatever you want to term it, it rarely lasted more than a couple of generations. The next person's, would get fed up and think, oh, I'm not going to practice that or whatever, and it would just, as far as a family tradition, go by the by.
Absolutely.
And I think, at least, sort of a lot of the modern practitioners, Gemma Gary, like you've mentioned, is not trying to establish some huge personal lineage, but merely saying this is the folk magic of where I live in Cornwall, and these are the sources where it comes from, and it's a revitalising of an old tradition rather than something which they're trying to establish a lineage which doesn't exist to.
Absolutely.
Which sadly has been the problems with Wicca and a lot of the other lineages, sort of probably, Planetubal Cain being another case.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that was a kind of alternative to Wicca that was sort of established itself in the 60s. It was, the Planetubal Cain and Robert Cochrane, who was
Roy Bowers.
Yeah, real name Roy
yes,
Bowers,
name, yeah.
which is I don't know why Robert Cochrane just sounds as Roy Bowers myself. I don't know why he changed it, but I found something more magical than that. But it was kind of seeing it I think it was part of the founding of, or the refounding of traditional witchcraft. It comes from there, but as we've discovered, it was a bollocks basically. He was even worse than Gerald Gardner for just making stuff up.
I think the problem was that a lot of these people tried to establish a lineage behind what they were saying to give it some kind of extra gravitas, but sadly when you examine the lineages of these things, as far as personal verifiable connections are concerned, they just don't exist.
Absolutely not.
And most of the material from which the traditions are drawn, a lot of it is purely 20th century or 19th at best.
Absolutely. When we go back to Colin Rowe we were talking about earlier on, I mean, I don't think he would ever claim any lineage as such.
No,
kind of popped out of the blue.
He didn't come. Although he was supposedly the seventh son of a seventh son, which is a traditional sort of magical thing to be born. He was not from a family of cunning folk. I mean, his family weren't practitioners of magic at all.
No. I know from his one of his sons had many children. One son grew up and tried to follow in his footsteps.
He did indeed, yes. Yeah, Edward or Buck Merrill,
created things called the witch bottles, the iron witch bottles at the blacksmith, local blacksmith used to forge for Cunning Merrill. Now I would imagine that they were probably forged badly, deliberately, so that they would break easily. Because one of the ways of breaking a spell was you'd put the witch bottle on a fire.
I don't think that's the case. I don't think they were badly forged, because obviously if you've got something which is metal and got a stopper in it and you heat it on a fire, eventually, providing it is airtight, it is going to explode. That's obviously what happened.
But I would imagine it would break relatively easily, and I think the one that Buckmore had made to try and follow his father's footsteps was rather too well made or too well sealed, because when that exploded, it blew half the house down, didn't it?
Yeah, blew the side of his cottage off, basically,
so wrecked it.
That was his first and only sort of, venture into his father's footsteps, really.
Absolutely, because the idea was you'd create this witch bottle to try and break a witch's spell, because cunning men were like battled witches basically. They weren't witches themselves, were they? They were like
No, I mean, ever since the 16th century and this sort of 17th century and this change in the law, I think that there was this divergence between folk witches and cunning folk. That cunning folk would get away with what they were doing because it was professed to be under the auspices of God and his angels rather than the devil, which is what witches were traditionally associated with.
Absolutely.
But to be honest, prior to that time, they were probably the same kind of people.
Oh yeah, interchangeable. Really,
the root is interchangeable at the end of the day.
I think it's probably for purposes of sort of legal protection, he would be perceived or will want to be seen as someone who's breaking witches' spells, because witches were supposed to be the baddies. But yeah, I mean, so there's an arbitrary line between the two, if it exists at all, really. So
exactly,
quite nonsensical.
It's another one of those grey areas, just like black and white magic.
Absolutely. Kind of brings me on to what we're going to talk about next, which really is the occult itself, our own interest in that. The Graveyard Wanderers, which is a very fascinating book. It's actually part of someone's dissertation on Swedish folk magic. Basically involving obviously graveyards, hence the title Graveyard Wanderers, but involving charms and spells from sort of folklore of Scandinavia, which I have personally become very fascinated by, particularly English folklore, obviously folk magic, which links into the Andrew Chumley guy who was talking about a bit earlier on. He was also a regular at EarthQuest, and I do still have this vague image in my head of the guy, of someone who fitted his description, actually standing by a big window upstairs in the ship pub where EarthQuest used to meet, and I'm sure it was Chumley because it was a slightly roundish guy, red hair, sort of tied up on top. Definitely that image blazing in my head as being...
Yeah, as I said earlier, I mean, unfortunately he didn't go to too many EarthQuests after that because, he had a bit of a falling out with Andrew over, the sort of the rights and wrongs of pulling artefacts from ancient sites.
Absolutely.
Which unfortunately they just had to agree to disagree on.
So we are talking about what is now really called traditional witchcraft, as him being one of the innovators of bringing that tradition kind of back to life almost.
True, although what he took on board was, it was still from a number of different sources. It wasn't one pure tradition that Andrew actually practiced. I mean, he, had a lot of other what might be termed occult interests. I mean, he was introduced to various other things. Jamaican beer, for example, from a guy, which is sort of one of the Afrocentric religions. He also had interests in sort of voodoo and Lakumi, or Santeria as it's also known, and all of these certainly coloured his sort of the operative side of his sort of Essex witchcraft, as it might be termed.
Yeah.
I just want to mention this article I came across recently about the Vatican. Apparently,
the Vatican are now offering courses in how to train to become an exorcist. I remember saying before, because of the peripheral, these films of vampires and werewolves, where they seem to be the goodies and not being too bad, and that kids are kind of following in the footsteps of this sort of stuff, that people are having to now turn to the Vatican to be protected by these things. Yeah. Vatican's exorcism course come amid growing interest in the occult. Okay, right. So the Vatican was holding a course about exorcism this week amid the burgeoning interest in the practice and the occult in general, according to one of the organisers. We have held this course for the last 10 years, and the numbers of those wanting to attend keep growing, said Giuseppe Ferrari. Essentially it's the same as I said last week, but there are actually proper courses now being run about it. It's all about because of the interest in True Blood and Twilight and that kind of thing. Last year they had 50 students, so this year had 50, and this year we have 200 people from 30 countries all wanting to attend. The Vatican's course, Exorcism and Prayer for Liberation, provides the tools needed to cast demonic spirits from human hosts, according to the official website. The 6-day event, ending on Saturday whenever, I don't know, also aims to teach practitioners how to distinguish real demonic possession from mental illness and cult worship. So that, I don't think any 6-day...
Best of luck.
Yeah, absolutely. Any 6-day course can teach you how to identify mental illness is having a laugh. It's like saying to somebody that, you go to a friend and say, "I'm pain in my stomach." Your friend says, "I read a book about appendices. Maybe your appendices to come out. Shall I operate for you?" I haven't read one book on the subject. It's not a good idea. But yes, I thought that was rather amusing.
so to really just summarise our sort of discussion for the evening.
You think the occult just means hidden. It's not immediately obvious. It's esoteric knowledge versus... probably the biggest division comes down to the idea of knowledge against faith.
Yep.
Traditional Western religions, Christianity obviously being the main one, are faith-based. They don't like you questioning, do they? They don't like you exploring. The occult is about knowledge, it's about exploring, it's about understanding, and these things stand opposed to each other. Because faith, unfortunately, is seen as being the only true way to, quotations, God, but then that depends what you define as being God. And as someone who follows the Advaita Vedanta, this is God, the whole universe, we're all God. It's all one thing, it's all Brahman, so I don't have a problem with that.
Well, or as Crowley said, every man and woman is a star. It kind of fits in with that as well,
Absolutely. We're all made of stardust. Yeah. We're all billions and billions of years old already.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show. I hope you've enjoyed this evening's show. As I say, it's partly a pre-record I made with a good friend of mine, Richard Ward, some time ago, and put together for tonight's show. Hopefully next month we'll be back, and my co-host Ronald Murphy will be available again, having been working his good old socks off at the various conferences he's been involved in the last few weekends, which is to say why he's not been available to record this month's show. But hopefully you'll tune in again and enjoy another adventure with the Transatlantic Power Radio show. So for now, it's good night from me, and I'm sure good night from Ron wherever he is. Good night.